Hello and welcome back to South Park Explained on No Bullshit. Today we turn to talking about the latest and greatest episode of South Park called Band in China. This title has a double meaning to it too, as it first means band as in a rock band, which is a part of the secondary story here. And also, band refers to getting banned or forbidden, something which China does a lot, and South Park here is mercilessly mocking them for it. Basically, the episode's main premise revolves around Tegrity Farms again. Like with the last episode, this location is also used as the title introduction song, which is a remixed version of the original South Park intro, rewritten as Going Down to Tegrity Farms. Yes, this Tegrity Farms storyline does continue here, as many had suspected last week, including myself. And well, it looks like this season can pretty much be seen as a joke spin-off version of South Park with the new Tegrity Farms name. For those who don't know, Tegrity Farms was a plotline that started all the way back in last year's season. Back then, Randy Marsh decided to grow a certain green plant that recently became legal. And in its original run, Tegrity Farms was portrayed mostly positively too. This season that's completely flipped around though, and now we're seeing some of the downsides of growing that infamous recreational plant, which I can't even mention here by name. And ironically enough, the taboo side of that plant is part of today's news story in this episode too. Things start off this week with Stan Marsh sitting in his room attempting to write a new song. Then his dad pops in, Randy Marsh, who announces to the family that he plans to travel to China to expand his Tegrity Farms business model. As Randy waits on his plane to visit China, he's angered when he sees that many other people traveling there are trying to make money in China like him. Specifically, Randy sees NBA basketball players joining the flight. And also, more notably, Disney and Marvel Cinematic Universe characters join in as well. These references carry on throughout this episode too, mostly focusing on Disney-owned characters like Iron Man, Thor, Stormtroopers, Kylo Ren, Winnie the Pooh, and even the now infamous Captain Marvel makes a brief appearance here too, even sporting her new signature short haircut, which came to life on the screen in Avengers Endgame earlier this year. And this premise is not only really funny, seeing Randy go down this let's sell to China route, but also it's extremely relevant as most major film studios and other big companies like the NBA players, they all get mentioned, and they're all trying to appeal to Chinese audiences these days more than ever. And that isn't necessarily bad on its own, but the next step in this story reveals that there really are some big and glaring downsides to pandering to China too much. But first, let's get back to Stan's part of this story, which eventually leads back to China too. As mentioned in the beginning, Stan was writing a song, and now he started a new rock band who's about to premiere at a local autumn festival. Turns out, Stan is writing songs about how he hates living on Tegrity Farms with his family, and this becomes even more funny when the music they play turns out to be hardcore death metal, with super loud guitars and screaming and everything. A pretty cool premise that gets taken to the next level when a talent agent quickly approaches the band, offering them a chance to get rich and famous. And funny enough, the agent references how he also manages another South Park band, the PC Babies, which is another reference to an episode from last season. But back to the rock band that Stan has created, they won't be making records or selling song singles like they initially had thought. Actually, the new way to make money in music is to make your band's biopic, meaning you make a movie dramatization of your band's rise and sometimes fall from fame and success. This, of course, lightly references the recent wave of rock biopics that have come out in the last year, including Queen's movie Bohemian Rhapsody, Elton John's one called Rocket Man, and Motley Crue's called Dirt. Also, the movie that's about to get made in the South Park episode, it's going to tie in with this China pandering story too, because, of course, Stan's new agent wants their film to cater to that audience as well. And here's where the big conflict comes into play for this episode. With all these companies and movies and even farmers trying to sell to China more in current year, well, their products are inevitably getting changed and manipulated in many different ways in the process, usually not for good reasons. You see, South Park really goes in hard on China here, as they probably should, but that's certainly not an easy thing to do these days either, especially for media properties like them. China has over 1 billion people and growing, and its industry and money-making and spending abilities are improving and growing each year. This part isn't necessarily bad on its own either, but combine all that with the fact that China is run by a very authoritarian and very strict and ruthless communist party, and problems start to arise immediately. You see, to put it kindly, China's government is pretty shitty. They treat their people like peasants, and they keep a strong stranglehold on everything coming in and out of their nation, including products like entertainment. But the desire to have access to China's huge huge customer base and the profits they could get from that, well, this has caused American companies and others to do two terrible things. First, they tend to look the other way when China does horrible stuff, like, for example, how they've been violently squashing the current protesters seeking equal rights and freedom in Hong Kong, amongst other human rights violations over the years. And in addition, and the focal point of this South Park story today is how entertainment companies have tried to pander to China so much, they're changing their products a great deal in the process in order to hopefully play well overseas. And playing well overseas in China means a number of things. Mostly, if your movies or TV shows or video games contain any of their many banned or taboo topics, your product won't even get a chance to sell over there at all. China happily and quickly bans many things that don't fit in with its strict communist government and their antiquated and strictly enforced status quo. Examples of banned subjects brought up here include anything that jokes about or criticizes the Chinese president, and also gay characters are banned and topics related to homosexuality. And in addition, anything that has to do with drugs too much is a no-go too, like what Randy Marsh's new plan involves. Speaking of Mr. Marsh, let's get back to him. He quickly gets stopped at China's customs department at the airport when he lands. He doesn't even realize his green plant is highly illegal over there. So when he's caught bringing a suitcase full of it to China, he quickly gets arrested and sent to a very brutal and savage prison camp that they have in that nation. This leads to Randy encountering another banned thing in that jail: the characters from the Winnie the Pooh cartoon. This is a reference to last year when China banned the latest Winnie the Pooh movie because the character was often compared to the Chinese president in less than flattering ways. Winnie the Pooh and Piglet quickly become tragic side characters in this South Park episode too, as they continue to rail against China for banning so many things for such terrible reasons like mocking their leader. This leads to more trouble for Stan's part of the story too, as he can barely film a scene for his new biopic movie without getting stopped, censored, or getting suggestions pushed on him for edits, based on trying to appeal to China's more strict sensibilities. This is obviously hard to do when you're making a rock band's origin story too, since it will inevitably involve sex, drugs, and perhaps homosexuality, all topics that don't get past the censors controlling China and their government, and censoring their media imports heavily. Next, after seeing how bad the living conditions are in their prison system, Randy is brought before a group of Chinese judges, and he pleads with them to accept some of his tegrity, meaning both integrity or strength in character, and also, he's of course alluding to his Tegrity Farms plant products, which he came there to sell initially. Then, later, Randy and the Disney and Marvel characters gather around, and they're confronted by a very angry leader, Mickey Mouse, who appears, as he is upset that someone tried to insult the Chinese government. Randy then tells Mickey that he also needs some Tegrity too, and starts to make a deal with him. Mickey and Randy attempt to sell Tegrity Farm plants to China together, but the government members again refuse to listen. Mickey later states this is due to their anger against Winnie the Pooh. So, in reaction to that, as Pooh and Piglet walk the streets of China, they come across a jar of honey which ends up being a trap. As Pooh starts to eat it, they are attacked and killed by Randy, showing just how far Mr. Marsh will go to get into China's good graces. And one of the funniest lines of the episode happens here too, and probably one of the funniest lines on this show in a good long while. It comes from the now infamous Mickey Mouse character we just mentioned. First of all, the way he's portrayed on South Park as this angry, money-grubbing asshole is always hilarious to see, and it's been a very memorable character who's gotten some classic episode story arcs over the years. And this episode today is no different, nor is it less memorable. This notable line that we're referencing happens when Mickey is questioning all the characters in a room, asking who is responsible for angering China. Randy then responds saying it was him, Randy Marsh from South Park. And this prompts the mouse to reply saying, "What the hell is South Park? Do I own that?" To which someone off screen says, "Not yet, sir." This is a real laugh out loud moment here for sure. And it goes to show not only how big and arrogant Disney has become in media and its aggressive acquisitions, but also it shows how much disdain the South Park team has for the house that the mouse built. In the end, Stan continues to struggle with filming and writing his band's biopic, with China's influence growing as they even have military generals watching over his whole production. This results in a new strategy being formed. Stan decides to briefly reunite with his old band called Finger Bang for a whole new biopic to be filmed. excellent. But he quickly changes his mind once again during the filming and decides he's going to refuse to sell out to China, commenting that anyone who does this is worthless in his view. Meanwhile, Tegrity actually becomes legal in China, which results in a dump truck full of money being unloaded at the family's farm. Randy then freely discloses to the family that he had to kill Pooh in order to make this all happen. And back to the boy band that's called back here, Fingerbang is actually from another classic South Park episode from about 16 years ago. Back then they were mocking boy bands too, and now they briefly reunite here because this band is the kind of lame, politically correct, status quo kind of music that will eventually meet China's strict standards. This, for me, was an amazing callback, totally. And coming from so long ago too, it really goes to show how timeless a show South Park really is. Also, another noteworthy moment was when Randy makes an ad for China at the end of this. In it, he shows clips of modern China squashing protests violently, along with biting lines in the background saying things like, after a hard day of forced labor and being beat for criticizing the government. And also, Randy says, you gotta lower your ideals of freedom if you want to suck on the warm teat of China. Both of these lines go to show not only how messed up it is to pander in this way to these people, to such an egregious violator of human rights, but also, this parody commercial was so funny and politically relevant, it shows South Park is here to stay, and they're more humorous and in touch with today's events than ever. This episode was truly funny as hell to me, and it had great political commentary too, and it's definitely South Park at its best as well, and it goes to show in the reviews and reactions, which are very, very much positive on this one, which is quite different than last week's, which was kind of mixed. Also, the South Park team must still be making these episodes in the 6 days leading up to their release, because some references here sounded like they came straight out of the newspapers from last week. For example, the organ harvesting accusation against the Red Nation, the sleeping giant, is something that just recently hit the national spotlight once again. So bravo to South Park and its creators Matt and Trey for making another instant classic with this one here. This episode was so spot on and hilarious, I could barely contain myself. And I love how this is so fresh with material that has been circulating in the news this week, because it gives us at this Explained show here plenty to talk about. I thought both Stan and Randy's plot lines were excellent this week. There were just too many hysterical moments to even fit them all into one video. The whole episode was just perfect, and talk about a fantastic 1-2 punch these first 2 episodes of this new season were. Really goes to show how comedies can be really funny these days without having to reference Trump and partisan politics whatsoever. Plenty of hypocrisy in the world today to take advantage of these days. And I have to say, I can't wait to see what these guys are going to show us next week and going forward in this season. What did you guys think? Did you like this new episode? Did you appreciate that commentary on pandering to China and how that's bad to do for a number of reasons, including indirectly condoning their bad behavior and also negatively affecting the media that's being produced, who self-censors in order to try and appeal to a very strict status quo? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.